This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're tackling a subject that, well, on the surface, sounds a little like the cure for insomnia. We're talking about the structure of the modern university.
It doesn't exactly scream thriller, does it?
It really doesn't. But, and this is a big but, the sources we've got on the stack today tell a story that is completely the opposite. We're not looking at a slow, boring evolution of curriculum.
No.
We're looking at a story about military collapse, spies, total national humiliation, and just a desperate scramble for survival.
That is the reality. The university system we know today, the way we do research, the PhD, the separation of church and state in schools, it didn't come from some high-minded debate. It came from the battlefield.
Specifically, Prussia in 1806. And the argument here is just fascinating. You have a defeat, which triggers a mobilization, which then results in a new institution.
That's the causal chain right there. Defeat, mobilization, institution.
And along the way, we're going to find out why a crushing loss to Napoleon is the very reason philosophers ended up replacing priests as the guardians of education.
Exactly. And the sources are clear. This wasn't about the Enlightenment or some lofty ideals. It was about building a machine that could fight back.
A rescue mission.
The state was sinking, and education was pretty much the only life raft left.
So let's set the scene. It's 1806. To really get the solution, we have to understand the problem. What actually went down in Prussia?
Catastrophe. I mean, that's the only word for it. We're talking about the Battle of Jena Auerstedt. You have to remember, Prussia had this legendary reputation. This was the land of Frederick the Great. They thought they had the best army in Europe.
Right, they were the Spartans of the North. An army with a state, not a state with an army, that whole thing.
Exactly, and then they run into Napoleon. And look, it wasn't just a loss, it was a dismantling. The sources describe the Prussian army, which was drilling like it was still 1750, getting absolutely shredded by Napoleon's modern army.
So the Prussians were rigid, slow.
Obsessed with old tactics, Napoleon was fluid, fast, and motivated.
It sounds kind of like a Kodak moment. You're the king of the hill, relying on old tech, in this case, old military doctrine, and then suddenly this digital disruption arrives and just wipes you out in an afternoon.
That's a great analogy. The shock was total. The king fled, the army just dissolved, and Napoleon rode right into Berlin. But the military defeat was really just the symptom. When the Prussian leadership looked at the wreckage, they realized the rot went way, way deeper than the battlefield.
The notes mention this diagnosis phase. They realized the bureaucracy was powerless. But the thing that really stood out to me was the social aspect. The sources say there was a total lack of national unity.
And this is crucial. When Napoleon marched in, the average Prussian peasant didn't really care. They were subjects, not citizens.
Right.
Whether they paid taxes to a Prussian king or a French emperor, it didn't change their daily lives all that much. The rigid class system meant they just had no stake in the game.
So the leadership has this horrifying realization. We lost because our people don't care if we exist.
Yes. They realized that fixing the hardware, better muskets, new marching drills, it wouldn't work if the software was corrupted. They had been defeated by a nation, France, where the soldiers were fighting for France for an idea.
And Prussia was just fighting for a monarch.
Exactly. So to survive in this new modern world, they decided they needed to upgrade the software. They had to manufacture a new kind of person.
And this is the pivot. Education suddenly shifts from being, a luxury for the elite?
Right.
To being the core condition for state survival. If you can't build a citizen, you can't build an army. Simple as that.
Which brings us to the mobilization phase. And the central figure here is Johann Gottlieb Fichte. Now, usually when I read philosopher in a history book, I'm picturing a guy quietly writing in a study. Fichte sounds more like a radical revolutionary.
Oh, he was absolutely a radical.
Yeah.
You have to picture the context. Berlin is occupied by French troops. There are spies everywhere. And Fichte gets up and starts delivering these lectures, the addresses to the German nation.
This wasn't some academic tenure-seeking. This was high-stakes political theater.
It feels incredibly dangerous. He's basically standing in the middle of an occupied city shouting, "We need to overthrow the system."
In a way, yes. He's arguing that the defeat happened because the German people lacked a self. He said, armies and laws do not create a nation. He argued a nation is created by making citizens through education.
He draws this distinction in the speeches that I found really compelling between external force and internal discipline.
That's the core of his argument. The old Prussian model was all external. You obey the law because the soldier will hit you. You obey the king because you have to. It's fear-based.
Right.
Fichte argued that a modern nation needs citizens who obey because they want to.
Because they have internalized the state itself.
Right, internal discipline. They see themselves as part of the whole. If you have to force your people to fight, you've already lost. Fichte wanted education to mold the students' will so that they would act in the interests of the nation automatically.
It's almost a little chilling when you frame it that way. It's psychological engineering.
It is. It's the difference between a mercenary and a patriot. Napoleon won with patriots. Fichte told the Prussians, we need to use education to mass produce that kind of patriotism.
So Fichte is the hype man. He's the visionary shouting the why.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the guy who built the actual system, was he? The notes say he provided the ideology, but not the blueprints.
Correct. Fichte pointed the direction. We must educate to survive. But turning that into policy required a different kind of mind, and that fell to Wilhelm von Humboldt.
The architect.
The builder. Humboldt was a pragmatist. He had to take this fiery nationalist philosophy and turn it into a functioning government institution. And this brings us to the part of the research that I think is the most surprising.
Yeah, I was expecting the big reform to be something like universal literacy or military school for everyone. But the source focuses on this one specific, almost bureaucratic change that Humboldt made. He moved the center of teacher training from the Faculty of Theology to the Faculty of Philosophy.
It sounds like such a minor administrative shuffle, doesn't it? Like moving the break room to the second floor.
It really does. But the source argues this was the nuclear option. This changed everything.
To understand why, we have to look at what those faculties actually represented back in 1810. For centuries, the Faculty of Theology was the boss. If you were a teacher in Europe, you were effectively a priest, or at least trained by them. The church controlled the flow of information.
So the local school teacher was basically an extension of the pulpit.
Precisely. And Humboldt, looking at the wreckage of 1806, decided that the Faculty of Theology was a security risk.
A security risk. That is a heavy label for a bunch of theologians. Why? Why were they unfit for the modern state?
Well, a few reasons. First, sectarianism. If your teachers are trained as Lutheran theologians, they can't teach Catholics. If they're Catholic, they can't teach Protestants. It creates division.
Okay, that makes sense.
A modern nation-state needs unity. It needs citizens to identify as Germans first, or Prussians, not just as members of a specific church.
Right, if you're trying to build one nation, you can't have the education system reinforcing religious tribalism.
Second, and this is critical, theologians are ill-equipped to teach the natural sciences. Their training is in scripture, dogma, interpretation of ancient texts. But the world Prussia was trying to catch up to, the world of industry, ballistics, logistics, that world required math and science.
You can't interpret your way to a better canon.
No. And thirdly, the state needed to distribute what the source calls universal reason. They needed citizens who could think critically, solve problems, function in a bureaucracy. The dogmatic method of theology, memorize this because it's truth, was just incompatible with the agile thinking needed for a modern state.
So Humboldt looks at the Faculty of Philosophy as the alternative. Now, we should probably clarify this because today, if I say philosophy major, people think of someone reading Kant in a coffee shop. But in 1810, philosophy meant something much broader.
A huge distinction. At that time, the Faculty of Philosophy, sometimes called the Faculty of Arts, was the catch-all for Wissenschaft.
Wissenschaft.
It translates to science or scholarship. It included logic and ethics, yes, but it also included mathematics, physics, biology, history, philology.
So it was basically the STEM plus humanities department.
Yeah, exactly. It was the Swiss Army knife of faculties. By moving teacher training there, Humboldt was ensuring that the people teaching Prussian children were grounded in secular, scientific, and rational subjects.
And this is where the whole concept of the research university comes in, right?
Yeah.
The notes mention that Humboldt changed how learning happened, not just what was taught.
This is maybe his biggest legacy. Under the old model, a professor read from a book and students wrote it down. Humboldt introduced the seminar. The idea was that the professor and the students were co-researchers. They weren't just consuming knowledge.
They're producing it.
They were producing new knowledge.
That's the birth of the PhD model.
It is, the research imperative. Humboldt argued that if you want the state to stay ahead, your universities can't just be archives of the past. They have to be engines of the future. They have to be constantly discovering new things.
And again, this links right back to survival. If your enemy is innovating and you are just memorizing, You lose.
That's the logic. So by elevating the faculty of philosophy, Humboldt wasn't just being a nice guy who liked science. He was effectively saying, the state needs science to survive, so the state is taking control of education away from the church and giving it to the scientists.
It's a massive power grab. He promoted philosophy to be the central organ of the state.
He did. And the result was the German university model, which became the envy of the world. American universities, for example, are largely modeled on this Humboldtian system. But we often forget the origin. We think of it as a place for free thought.
But it was designed as a place for national strengthening.
Right. The freedom of the professor was granted so that they could produce better results for the state.
I want to bring up one more name that's in the outline because he usually dominates this conversation. Hegel. Where does he fit into all this?
It's important to place him correctly. We often credit Hegel with this whole state is everything philosophy, but the source makes a specific note that we shouldn't mystify him. Hegel comes a bit later in the timeline.
So he wasn't the architect.
No. Humboldt was the architect, Fichte was the catalyst. Hegel? Well, Hegel provided the justification language after the fact. He wrote the complex philosophy that explained why this new system was the ultimate expression of the world's spirit.
He wrote the marketing brochure after the building was already up.
Essentially. He provided the intellectual cover, but the system itself wasn't built because of Hegel's books. It was built because the Prussian army got crushed in 1806 and they needed a fix, fast.
It really strips away the romance of the ivory tower, doesn't it? We tend to think of the history of education as this benevolent march toward enlightenment. People getting smarter, societies getting kinder.
That's the fairy tale.
But the story says, no. The modern university, secular, research-focused, science-heavy, was a weapon. It was designed to create a unified population that could resist invasion.
It's the logic of survival. And if you look at the timeline, it worked. Prussia rebuilt itself, unified Germany, and became the dominant power in Europe by the end of the century. The software update was a success.
Which forces us to ask the big so what for today. I mean, we are living through our own massive disruptions.
That's the key takeaway. We tend to view our educational institutions as static. This is just how school works. But the Prussian example shows us that major educational reforms are almost always reactions to a crisis.
They are lagging indicators of a panic.
Exactly. Prussia panicked about Napoleon, so they built the research university. In the 1950s, America panicked about Sputnik, so we poured money into STEM and built the modern science foundation.
So if we look at the reforms happening now, or the ones that should be happening, we need to ask, what is the defeat we're trying to avoid?
Is it economic irrelevance in the face of AI? Is it the fragmentation of truth in the age of algorithms?
That's a powerful thought. Fichte and Humboldt were trying to solve the problem of how do we build a citizen who acts for the nation? Today, we might be asking, how do we build a human who can outthink a machine?
Or how do we build a citizen who can discern truth from noise? The content changes, but the mechanism is the same. Education is how a society updates its software to survive a new environment.
Puts a lot more weight on those school board meetings, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
So to recap the journey, we started at the smoking ruins of Jena in 1806, where a military collapse revealed a broken society. We heard Fichte screaming from the rubble that we need to build citizens, not subjects. We watched Humboldt execute the maneuver, swapping out the priest for the scientist to run the classroom. And we realized that the modern university isn't a monument to peace. It's a fortification built for survival.
A fortification of the mind.
We'll leave you with that thought. The next time you walk past a university library or see a science lab, remember, it wasn't built just to read books. It was built to keep the nation alive. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.